When we look at global icons, people like Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, or wildly successful athletes, we naturally assume we are looking at solitary geniuses. The cultural narrative tells us these individuals possessed a rare, innate talent, put their heads down, and single-handedly built empires from scratch. This is the formula we're taught to believe. Talent plus ambition equals success. But when you look closely at the data behind world-class achievement, that equation falls apart entirely. Take the Canadian Junior Hockey League. If you examine the rosters of these elite players, a massive statistical anomaly emerges. More than 70% of them share birth months in January, February, or March. This is a direct result of a simple administrative rule, the January 1st cutoff date. In a league of 9-year-olds, a child born on January 2nd is nearly a full year older than a child born on December 30th. At that age, a 12-month gap results in a massive advantage in physical size, strength, and speed. Coaches observe this temporary physical maturity and mistake it for innate talent. The older children are selected for elite teams, granting them access to superior coaching, access to better facilities, and twice the practice time. Over a decade, these small early advantages stack into a massive skill gap. Sociologists call this the Matthew effect, where those who begin with a slight edge are handed the resources to pull permanently ahead. We celebrate the final talent on the ice, entirely ignoring the arbitrary cutoff dates that artificially filtered out half the population before the race even began. Talent acts as an initial entry ticket, but it only takes you up to a certain threshold. Reaching world-class mastery in any complex domain requires intense, deliberate practice. Psychologists have found that this threshold sits right around 10,000 hours of focused repetition. Before they were global superstars, the Beatles were struggling musicians in 1960. They traveled to Hamburg, Germany, where local clubs demanded they perform live on stage for 8 hours a night, 7 days a week. By the time their first major hit album dropped in 1964, they had played together for well over 10,000 hours, forging a level of group synergy that no other band could match. In 1968, computers were room-sized machines, and even most top universities didn't have access to one. Yet, as an 8th grader, Bill Gates enrolled at a high school that possessed a teletype computer terminal. He gained free, unrestricted access, eventually sneaking into a local university at 3 a.m. to code continuously. By the time the personal computer revolution officially launched in 1975, Gates already had his 10,000 hours of programming experience. Intense ambition and work ethic are baseline requirements, but they rely entirely on extreme, localized opportunities that actually allow you to clock those hours. Beyond local opportunities, there is an invisible filter operating at the macroeconomic level. The exact year you are born tightly constrains your ability to capitalize on major historical shifts, like the 1975 personal computer boom. This timeline charts the birth years of the individuals who built the modern tech industry: Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Google's Eric Schmidt, and Sun Microsystems' Bill Joy. They were all born in a tiny 3-year window between 1953 and 1956. If you were born before 1950, by the time the tech revolution arrived in 1975, you were likely married, paying a mortgage, and holding a corporate job. You couldn't afford to take wild financial risks on a new industry. If you were born after 1958, you were still in high school. You simply missed the initial wave. The 1954 to 1956 cohort hit 1975 at exactly 20 or 21 years old. They had the cognitive maturity to grasp the technology, combined with the total freedom to drop out of college and launch startups. Achieving visionary status requires standing exactly on the shoreline when the historical tsunami makes impact. Chris Langan possessed an IQ over 195, higher than Albert Einstein's. Yet growing up in severe poverty with an unstable family, he struggled with university administration, eventually dropping out to work as a bar bouncer. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, also possessed a genius-level IQ, but he successfully navigated ruthless political and military leaders to run the Manhattan Project. The diverging outcomes come down to the difference between analytical intelligence and practical intelligence. Analytical intelligence is raw processing power, your ability to execute math and logic. Practical intelligence is knowing exactly what to say, to whom, and how to say it to get what you want. Oppenheimer grew up in a wealthy, cultured environment. His family practiced concerted cultivation, actively teaching him how to confidently negotiate with adults, ask probing questions, and dominate a room. Langen's background taught him to fear and avoid authority. An astronomical IQ will repeatedly crash into structural walls if an individual's background hasn't provided them the hidden curriculum of social navigation. In the late 1990s, Korean Air experienced a severe spike in fatal crashes. Extensive scientific analysis revealed that the planes were mechanically flawless. The lethal variable in the cockpit was a cultural metric known as the Power Distance Index. In cultures with a high power distance index, extreme deference to seniors and authority figures is deeply ingrained. When junior co-pilots noticed severe weather or spotted captains making fatal navigational errors, they were culturally blocked from issuing direct commands. Instead, they used mitigated speech, subtle, polite hints that the captains easily ignored during high-stress situations. To stop the crashes, the airline implemented a systemic fix. They shifted the operational language of the cockpit to English, a highly direct, non-hierarchical language, and specifically trained co-pilots to speak up and issue commands. Our inherited cultural DNA heavily influences our split-second behaviors and perceived limitations, long before our conscious minds ever make a choice. This equation illustrates the actual mechanics of high-level achievement. Opportunity, combined with your cultural legacy, optimal timing, and 10,000 hours of deliberate practice, yields an outlier. To apply this, you have to start clocking your deliberate practice hours immediately. Simultaneously, audit the macro environment. Massive technological shifts, like the rapid integration of AI, are creating new historical windows right now. Timing your focused efforts to intersect with those shifts acts as a massive multiplier. You also need to actively train your practical intelligence. Technical skills must be paired with communication, negotiation, and social dynamics. And if you are in a leadership position, your job is to actively audit and remove arbitrary systemic barriers, like rigid cutoffs, so that every capable individual actually gets access to the resources they need. We cannot choose our birth year, our early opportunities, or our cultural starting lines. But by decoding the hidden architecture of success, we can stop relying on the myth of raw talent and start engineering the specific environments required to trigger our own outlier trajectory.